Archaeologists kneeling in the damp soil outside Szeged lowered a caliper against a 118-centimeter ellipse pressed into the subsoil, mapping the arched contour of a dismantled chariot axle that glinted with flakes of scorched bronze. The scent of wet clay and horsetail grass clung to their gloves as they compared the curvature to descriptions from Priscus, the diplomat who swore Attila's war car was plated with hammered gold. Under the soft shade of a tarpaulin lamp, their measurements unsettled. The campfire tale that the scourge of God rode a chariot conjured by dragons, because here lay burnt ash, iron rivets, and a smear of pine pitch. The myth had promised a tomb guarded by rivers diverted at sword point, yet the levelled earth whispered of craftsmen practicing balance and weighted drag. The hush of the evening field asked whether the echo of a wheel rut could ever replace the fevered legend of a warlord who vanished without a grave. If this gentle history soothes you, please subscribe softly tonight. The first tactile glimpse of Attila arrives through Priscus of Panium, who sat beneath oiled lamps in 449 CE, dining on wooden trenchers while translating his diplomatic mission into hurried wax tablet notes that smelled faintly of beeswax and smoke. He recorded the linen cloths arranged over polished wooden benches, the silver cup offered, then withdrawn, revealing that the Hun king preferred rough-hewn goblets banded with iron. Priscus heard the low thud of drums outside the hall and watched the lamplit shimmer on Attila's simple sword, a weapon described as minimal, yet heavy enough to dent the reed mats under his feet. What was the diplomat to make of a ruler whose restraint felt theatrical? Attila's court shimmered because of craftsmen labouring at the edges of the great Hungarian plain, hammering composite bows while the night air tasted of glue boiled from bone. Recovered bow tips from the Tisa River, carbon dated to the mid-5th century, bend around horn cores just as Ammianus Marcellinus feared. Elastic limbs that could punch arrows through layered Roman scale. Blacksmiths quenched narrow blades in troughs that hissed, shaping small sea axes used to slit tasseled belts, an intimacy of leather and steel absent from Roman catalogues. The reflective hush of the workshop, interrupted only by the rasp of files, invites us to wonder if empire truly quakes at the sound of tools brushing rawhide. The breath of the steppe carried ritual stakes as Attila consults a carved sword believed to be the blade of Mars, yet the object Julius Firmicus recounts was likely a 92-centimeter single-edged sabre recovered near Szeged in 1926, its grip smelling of earth after centuries underground. The iron spine bears striations that match Sarmatian smithing patterns, revealing alliances rather than divine inheritance. Instead of thunder, the weapon's story is a dry scrape of rust beneath a conservator's scalpel. Still, the myth persists because the dim tent and flickering lamplight made it easier to believe that iron could glow with godly warning. The silence held because respect feels safer than demystifying sacred metal. The sand remembers tonight. Instruments hum softly. The hollow waits for a whisper carried by starlit frost. The horse herds that thundered along the Hungarian lowlands left behind bones scarred by repetitive archery posture, and zooarchaeologists at Debrecen University traced muscle attachments that thickened from hours of riding without saddles. Teeth patterns show grain feeding reserved for prized mares, proving logistical precision, while the smell of dried dung still clings to surviving corrals uncovered near Sentes. These animals hauled not just warriors, but the weight of tribute negotiated in soft, deliberate tones by Attila's envoys. The reflective question lingers. Was the empire threatened more by the hooves' vibration or by the negotiation tents perfumed with steppe milk? We slip to the western Roman frontier, where Bishop Leo met Attila near the Po River in 452, under a slate sky that tasted of rain and fear. Later mosaics show the Pope in shimmering gold, yet the only reliable note is Prosper of Aquitaine's chronicle, written in ink that soaked into vellum like a heartbeat. His lines mention hunger ravaging the Hun camp more than swordplay, a detail that rustles like damp linen. Stillness settled because famine speaks more softly than war trumpets. Could the real deterrent have been the smell of sickness wafting from stalled wagons rather than angelic apparitions? In Ravenna's archives, scribes copied treaties onto purple-dyed parchment that smelled faintly of shellfish dye, details proving that Attila demanded pounds of gold measured with scales calibrated against Roman standards. A bronze counterweight preserved in Milan weighs precisely 3 Roman pounds, its surface smoothed by countless fingers, and it witnessed the negotiation of £700 annual payments. Such tangible math undermines later legends that Attila wanted only destruction. Still, the reflective hum says numbers can reverberate like bells. Is the dread of tribute simply the arithmetic of submission? The quiet after the Catalonian Plains battle in 451 tasted of churned dirt and Mithridate liniment, as Roman and Visigothic field surgeons bound wounds beneath oil lamps sputtering in night rain. Jourdains later called the clash a salvation for Europe. Yet the battlefield archaeology around Chalon-sur-Marne has yielded more horsetack than human remains, suggesting dispersal rather than apocalyptic slaughter. A lone iron spur recovered in 1994, etched with simple cross-hatching, proves cavalry skirmishes but not decisive victory. Silence lingered because fog swallowed the cries, leaving chroniclers to fill the void with triumphant hymns. The reed beds murmur, dew cool on the tongue, anticipation suspended between breaths. Crossing eastward, we follow the courier Orestes, who negotiated prisoner exchanges while the smell of ink and tallow candles filled the carved wooden cabin of an administrative wagon. A single letter preserved in Vienna, though copied later, details weight allowances for grain sacks measured in modii, instructing quartermasters to verify moisture by rubbing kernels between their wrists. Evidence of this bureaucracy contradicts the idea of an unstoppable horde. Still, the reflection suggests that paperwork can be as frightening as arrows when it maps the reach of a ruler. Attila's diplomacy with the Eastern Roman court emerges through the Margus Treaty of 435, whose surviving fragment, written on papyrus that crackles like dry leaves, specifies the return of fugitives within 30 days. The parchment, held in the library of the Patriarchate under dry cedar scents, reveals an administrative mind counting days and border stones. Yet the reflective murmur wonders why later storytellers preferred to recall rivers turned to torrents of blood instead of the methodical tapping of styluses on tablets. When the Huns overran Nisus, historians describe flames licking marble, yet the archaeological layer from the late 430s shows collapsed roofs baked red by intense heat alongside grain storage jars still half full, smelling faintly of scorched wheat even today. A coin hoard unearthed near the Forum contains solidi minted in Constantinople, their edges smooth from circulation, proving the city's wealth persisted after the raid. The reflection surfaces gently, perhaps resilience grows in the taste of grit between teeth, not in heroic verses. The night wind hushes, barley dust drifts, breath waits in the rafters. In the remote sanctuary on the Alfold Plain, diviners listened for omens by running their hands over horse skulls hung from linden branches, a ritual recorded by the chronicler Sirmiensis, in a text now only preserved in a 12th century copy that smells of aged parchment and resin. The skulls bore cut marks aligning with sacrificial practices observed among sedentary Sarmatians, suggesting cultural exchange. Suppression followed. Byzantine writers later omitted these ceremonies to paint the Huns as ungodly. Yet the reflective question lingers: what wisdom was silenced when rituals sounded more like dialogue than menace? A layer of ash in Aquileia carries traces of cedar resin, hinting that refugees burned stored timbers to deny shelter to the invaders, an accident of resistance that let soot settle like fine powder on bronze hinges. Ammianus describes walls melting under Hun assault, but chemical analysis of mortar reveals collapse caused by weakened joints, not mystical fire. The reflective tone wonders why the image of supernatural flame hypnotizes more than the truth of crumbling engineering. Silence rises because humiliation prefers shadows to daylight. Jumping to the 6th century, Cassiodorus, writing from Ravenna, compiled the Getica, blending Hun tales into Gothic lineage while the smell of sea salt invaded his scriptorium. He merged fragmentary reports into a lineage myth, proving that memory can be forged like metal. The act of compilation muffled individual voices because politics required a grand narrative. Does the smooth vellum cool under the fingertips hold more sway than the voices lost in the redaction? The lamps flicker. Wax drips. Time sways in the draft. In the 8th century, a monk at Saint-Denis copied the frightening phrase flagellum Dei, while a storm rattled the abbey shutters, the damp scent of stone mixing with candle soot. He inserted Attila into Christian eschatology, turning the warlord into divine chastisement, effectively suppressing the nuance of diplomacy that earlier sources preserved. The reflective whisper admits that awe can be a cage. Once sanctified fear crystallizes. Who dares to erase it? The cloister sighs, echoing with distant footsteps like waves on stone. The 12th century Nibelungenlied reimagines Attila as Etzel, hosting feasts where wine splashes and torches twist smoky patterns across timbered halls. This poetic retelling thickened the legend with tactile excess, gold-threaded tapestries emitting faint scents of lanolin, benches polished by countless hands. Yet the poem's drama served courtly entertainment, not archival fidelity. Why did the singer's harp drown the quieter rustle of ledgers and treaties? Silence held because performance dazzled, and memory surrendered to applause. Frost clings to the strings, breath curls in verse, the hall glows in embers. Renaissance cartographers, mapping the Danube, annotated sections as Old Camp of Attila, while ink bled slightly on vellum that smelled of gallnuts. Their compass scratches etched ovals reminiscent of the 118-centimetre chariot trench, unknowingly echoing the measured artifact. Humanist scholars attempted to reconcile new findings with classical myths, proving the persistence of the motif. Still, political censorship in Buda under Matthias Corvinus suppressed accounts that questioned national heroic narratives, preferring Attila as ancestor rather than nuanced conqueror. The reflection drifts. Is cartography a confession or a dream? When the Ottoman chronicler Tursun Beg described the Huns in the 15th century, he sat beneath a silk awning where incense perfumed the air, drawing parallels between nomadic glory and Ottoman expansion. His ink strokes extended the legend eastward, suggesting continuity of imperial destiny. Yet his narrative downplayed Attila's fragile logistics, allowing silence to veil the hunger and mud recorded by earlier eyewitnesses. The reflective murmur asks if admiration can unintentionally erase the smell of sweat-soaked felt tents that once defined survival. 17th century Jesuit missionary Antonio Posavino travelled through Transylvania, noting villagers who still pointed to earthen mounds called Attila's graves, their fingers roughened by soil. He documented a ritual of leaving breadcrumbs on the mound's crest, a reverent silence born of awe rather than fear. His diary, preserved in Rome under the scent of aging leather bindings, gives tactile detail that contrasts with the roaring myth. Could reverence be as heavy a veil as suppression? The orchard breeze carries damp moss, twilight hums with insects, words settle gently. Enlightenment scholars, working in Vienna's bright salons, compared Priscus's Greek with Jordanes's Latin while sipping thick coffee whose bitter scent mingled with ink. They catalogued variants, marking margins with neat copperplate script that still catches light like tiny mirrors. These philologists chase the oval motif of authority, recognizing patterns of negotiation recurring like the measured chariot trench. Yet their reflective hush shows that even reasoned critique can feel like a lullaby when the world outside demands clearer villains. In 1756, Slovak naturalist Matej Bel trekked the Great Hungarian Plain, his boots coated in clay, measuring tumuli with a wooden rod marked in cubits. He recorded an earthwork's diameter close to 200 feet, and heard locals whisper that Attila slept beneath. His notes, smelling of sweat and crushed time, reveal how empirical observation brushed against legend, proving that fieldwork can destabilize inherited fear. Still, Accidents like collapsing burrows claimed explorers, and the resulting caution prolonged silence. Morning mists cling to his cloak, birdsong trembles, distances blur softly. The 19th century Hungarian national revival embraced Attila as ancestral patriarch, reciting epic poems under gaslight that hissed with a metallic tang. Historian Mihaly Horváth presented him as a unifying symbol, even as archival documents in Vienna contradicted the heroic portrayal. This romantic surge suppressed less flattering accounts through peer pressure rather than decree. The reflective question emerges quietly. How does patriotism taste when seasoned with selective memory? Curtains rustle, violins vibrate, the audience holds its breath. In 1847, archaeologist Floris Roma inspected a grave field near Szeged, his fingertips tracing corroded bridle bits that smelled of iron oxide and damp grass. He documented the bridle's cheek pieces, noting wear consistent with constant travel, grounding the legend in migratory logistics. His journals describe the crunch of soil beneath boots and the chill of dawn dew, embedding sensory detail. Yet bureaucratic hesitation in Budapest delayed publication, an institutional silence born of caution. Does the echo of withheld findings resemble a distant hoofbeat? Prussian scholar Theodor Mommsen in 1851 wrote beneath gas lamps that flickered against sandstone walls, asserting that Attila's power stemmed from tributary systems more than battle genius. His crisp Latin prose annotated the weight of gold per Roman soldier, referencing ledgers that smelled faintly of mould and linden. The reflective murmur notes that by casting the Huns as administrators, he stripped away the exotic dread but invited accusations of cold reductionism. The parchment crackled, pens scratched, and the night settled like velvet. Mid-century, Bavarian painter Johann Nepomuk Geiger depicted Attila riding through flames, applying layers of oil paint that smelled of linseed, while the studio floor collected grit. His canvas, glowing with ember tones, revived the apocalyptic myth, circulating widely in illustrated magazines. The vivid imagery partially eclipsed textual reassessments, proving that visual drama can drown out archival whispers. How many viewers tasted smoke in their imagination instead of considering tribute ledgers? Silence glimmered because spectacle outshone the measured ellipse buried in the soil. The river breathes, willows tremble, pigment dries in patience. By 1870, ethnographer Armin van Berry wandered steppe encampments, recording folk songs under the shimmer of starry nights, the air perfumed with kumis and wood smoke. He captured verses where Attila's name blended with shepherd laments, suggesting memory as melody. Ottoman censors, wary of nationalist stirrings, confiscated some notebooks, an act of suppression born of politics. The reflective hush asks whether confiscated melodies echo louder in absence. The grasses sway, strings pluck softly, whispers travel with the dew. Austro-Hungarian census officials in 1900 compiled data in offices smelling of sealing wax, listing villages named after Attila across the plain, proving how legend anchored identity. They tabulated population percentages while outside. Typewriters clacked like distant hooves. Statistical reports seem bloodless, yet they reveal the extent of cultural adoption. Still, accidents, like a flood destroying county archives in Szeged erased primary documents, an unintentional silence that complicates the narrative. Can data hum like a lullaby? Columns shimmer, ink dries, the page cools under fingertips. In 1902, French archaeologist A. Salomon excavated at Kouros River, unearthing composite bow fragments preserved in peat that smelled of tannins and bog water. He measured sinew lengths, noting elasticity matching Scythian designs, proving cross-cultural transmission. His reflective notes suggest that the true power lay in trade networks rather than raw ferocity. However, publication delays in Paris, caused by prioritizing Egyptian finds, left his Hun work languishing, another silence born of institutional priorities. The lantern sways, peat drips, patient stretches across the marsh. During World War I, trench soldiers on the Eastern Front nicknamed machine gun nests. Attilas, the metallic chatter mixing with mud and cordite smells. Propaganda posters revived the scourge myth to depict enemy savagery, showing how memory can be weaponized. The reflective whisper wonders how legends adapt to new artillery rhythms. Silence lingered between barrages because fear demanded storied names to grasp. Frost clung to barbed wire, breaths crystallized, history shivered in uniform. In 1921, Hungarian poet Mihaly Babits recited Attila József Alma under gaslight, his voice soft, the room perfumed with tobacco and old paper. He layered psychological nuance onto the warlord, revealing inner landscapes rather than battlefields. Literary critics embraced the vulnerability, yet political factions derided such tenderness, pressuring publishers into limited distribution, suppression through ridicule. Does empathy taste like honey or ash when poured over a notorious name? The piano lid vibrates, smoke curls, words settle like dust motes. Meanwhile, Soviet historian Nikolai Derzhavin, writing in 1936 within a Leningrad office, smelling of coal dust, framed Attila as a class leader representing nomadic proletariats. He cited archaeological evidence from Ukrainian dig sites, detailing half patterns and grain residue proving semi-settled life. His reflective tone insisted that material conditions shaped conquest more than charisma. Party editors trimmed passages that hinted at transnational identities, a political silence tightening like winter frost. The radiator clanks, ink thickens, breath fogs the window. The interwar discovery of the Nagy Harsany treasure in 1938, golden cups and silverware exuding a faint metallic scent, sparked debates about whether these were spoils or diplomatic gifts. Museums in Budapest polished them under soft electric light, revealing wear patterns indicating daily use rather than ceremonial display. Reflectively, the cups suggest a network of hospitality rather than mere plunder. Still, wartime evacuations hid the hoard in damp cellars, protective secrecy born from reverence and fear of theft. The corridor whispers, crates creak, shadows guard the gleam. World War II saw Nazi propagandists claim Attila as Proto-Aryan, printing pamphlets on rough paper that smelled of cheap pulp. They ignored the ethno-linguistic mosaic proved by grave goods and cranial metrics. Hungarian scholars who protested faced professional exile, silence enforced by threat. The reflective question surfaces: can truth breathe under jackboots? The night train rattles, rain taps on metal roofs, parcels of confiscated notes lie cold in crates. The embers fade, yet the earth remembers. After the war, in 1947, Hungarian archaeologist Gyula Laszlo catalogued graves at Kecskemét, recording the stratigraphy with pencils that squeaked over damp graph paper, the air heavy with clay and sweat. He noted bronze belt fittings etched with geometric motifs, linking them to Hellenic craftsmen. His reflective commentary emphasized cultural hybridity. However, Soviet oversight insisted on collective narratives, trimming nuance from publications, a suppression driven by ideological alignment. The tent flap rustles, lanterns swing, catalogue cards flutter softly. Breath condenses, patience hums. In 1953, Romanian historian Nicolae Stoicscu translated Priscus while listening to folk fiddles in Bucharest cafes, the aroma of plum brandy thick. He highlighted the diplomat's admiration for Hun discipline, challenging Western demonization. Still, state censors, wary of glorifying conquerors amid nation building, appended disclaimers. Reflection wonders whether admiration muttered under cafe lamps carries enough force to reshape sleeping myths. The violin sighs, glasses clink. The manuscript grows warm under his palm. The 1960s witnessed the Hungarian Academy of Sciences hosting symposia in marble halls, smelling of polish and chalk, where researchers displayed slides of the 118-centimetre chariot trench, aligning it with the original measurement first noted by Roma. They discussed soil compaction curves, proving repeated use rather than ceremonial burial. Yet the public preferred heroic murals at tourism fairs, illustrating suppression by distraction. A reflective murmur questions whether data projected on a screen can compete with painted flames. The slides were, shoes echo on stone, whispers gather like dust. In 1972, Turkish scholar Halami Durmoy visited Mongolian archives under the scent of yak butter lamps, tracing Han lineages back to Xiongnu inscriptions. He documented script carved into weathered stone, surfaces cold to the touch, revealing administrative continuity. His reflective stance suggested that Attila belonged to a broader Eurasian tapestry. Still, academic rivalries led to intentional silence as colleagues downplayed his findings in Western journals. The steppe wind moans, paper rustles, tea steam mingles with icy breath. The horizon exhales, stars sharpen, hoofbeats merge with heartbeat. By 1980, Soviet anthropologist Tatyana Polyakova analyzed skeletal remains from the Lower Volga, identifying isotopic signatures of varied diets tasting of millet and wild herbs. Her lab smelled of formaldehyde and cold metal. She concluded that Han elites consumed diverse food sources, reflecting economic flexibility. Publication in English lagged due to translation delays and accidental quiet. Reflectively, nourishment data softens the image of relentless raiders. Monitors buzz, pipettes clatter, the cold room hums like distant wind. Hungarian filmmaker Gabor Body's 1984 experimental film Attila 74 projected grainy images over ambient hums, mixing archival texts with whispers recorded in reverberant churches that smelled of beeswax. The film suggested memory as palimpsest. Yet state studios curtailed distribution, fearing avant-garde interpretations. Reflection asks, can cinematic shadows revive the tactile weight of a bronze bit? The projector whirs, church bells linger, incense swirls with celluloid dust. In 1989, as the Iron Curtain parted, archivists in Budapest opened sealed boxes filled with decades of censored correspondence, paper infused with the odour of aged cardboard. Letters from scholars like Vambury revealed suppressed field notes describing felt textures, horsehair ropes, and the cool heft of iron pots. The reflective sigh acknowledges that political thaw lets tactile truths breathe again. Still, the flood of information overwhelmed, leaving some reports unread, a silence born from sheer abundance. The corridor drafts, folders rustle, typewriters rest quietly. The 1990s brought environmental archaeologists who sampled pollen from the Great Plain, extracting cores that smelled of peat and distant storms. They discovered layers indicating cyclical droughts aligning with Hun migrations, proving environmental pressures shaped campaigns. Reflectively, climate becomes a soft metronome ticking beneath legend. Yet media coverage, chasing dramatic tales, largely ignored the subtle data. Why does the scent of peat fail to entice headlines? The lab freezer hums, cores thaw slowly, earth aromas rise in patient curls. In 1996, DNA analysis of remains at Sisongrad revealed mixed maternal lineages, the sterile tang of ethanol filling the lab. Geneticists found markers linking to Sarmatian, Germanic, and East Asian populations, proving ethnic fluidity. Reflectively, identity dissolves into shared breath. Still, nationalist groups dismiss the results, promoting purist myths, suppression via denial. The centrifuge spins, monitors blink, gloves snap against wrists. The night outside holds frost, stars watch silently. Entering the 21st century, a Hungarian-Romanian joint dig at Pijuria Negra uncovered iron cauldrons with soot layers smelling of charred garlic and venison, evidence of communal feasts. Radiocarbon dating placed them in Attila's era. The reflective whisper sees hospitality as power, warmth binding followers more than fear, yet an accident, a trench collapse. halted excavation, an imposed pause echoing earlier lost chances. Rain pattered on tarps. Medics murmured. The site slept in enforced calm. The soil cools, breath slows, patience weaves with drizzle. In 2005, digital humanities scholars scanned Priscus's manuscripts under blue light that smelled faintly of warmed plastic, revealing erased lines describing Attila's laughter ringing against wood rafters. The restoration proved scribes had scraped away humanizing details centuries earlier. Reflectively, laughter reshapes the scourge into a man with mirth. However, journal paywalls kept the findings behind economic barriers, a modern suppression via access. The servers hum, keyboards tap, pixels bloom like quiet constellations. By 2008, sensory historians recreated Hun textiles, spinning wool that felt oily, dyeing it with madder whose aroma resembled damp tea. They wore replica cloaks in wind tunnels to understand how fabric snapped and whispered. The reflective result showed fashion as a language of authority. Funding cuts ended the project abruptly, silence born of austerity. The loom creaks, threads tighten, hands remember even when budgets forget. Night gathers, lamps dim, craft lingers in fingertips. In 2012, underwater archaeologists probing the Tisar River used sonar that emitted gentle pings, water tasting metallic on their lips. They mapped timbers aligned in an arc matching the 118-centimeter measurement magnified into larger dimensions, suggesting ceremonial barges. Reflectively, perhaps Attila's burial myth arose from funeral boats rather than diverted rivers. Still, floods that year buried equipment in silt, an accidental hush. The current swirls, bubbles rise, sonar pulses echo like distant drums. A 2014 exhibit in Budapest's Hungarian National Museum displayed Attila-inspired artifacts under diffuse lighting, the room smelling faintly of cedar and bronze polish. Curators juxtaposed the chariot axle casting with medieval manuscripts, inviting visitors to feel the tension between measure and myth. Reflectively, the curation suggested harmony between tactile truth and narrative allure. Yet some attendees sought only battle reenactment footage, skimming past subtlety. A silence through inattentiveness. Footsteps soften on carpet. Audio guides murmur. Glass cases gleam softly. In 2016, drone surveys over the Alfold captured burial mounds at sunrise. The air crisp, rotors slicing the stillness. Thermal imaging detected subsoil anomalies shaped like crescents, resonating with the elliptical motif from the first excavation. Reflectively, technology becomes a new lamplight. However, privacy regulations restricted data release, a silence rooted in legal caution. The drone lands with a faint whir, grass rustles, the sky blushes with early light. The 2017 excavation near Szeged revisited the chariot ellipse, this time under LED worklights emitting a cool hum, the soil moist. Conservators lifted bronze bosses sticky with ancient resin, their gloves picking up earthy aromas. They compared notes with 1850s diaries, revealing continuity of measurement. Reflectively, the oval becomes a compass pointing through centuries. Still, local folklore insisted the trench was a dragon's footprint, reverent silence guarding tradition. Cicadas buzzed, trucks idled softly, the pit shone like a muted mirror. The sand remembers tonight, instruments hum softly, the hollow waits for a whisper carried by starlit frost. In 2018, interdisciplinary conferences in Szeged gathered climatologists, linguists and metallurgists in halls smelling of coffee and polished wood. Papers presented isotopic maps, philological nuances and metallographic analyses of sabres with striated grips. Reflectively, the synergy suggested that Attila's power derived from orchestrating diverse skills. However, tensions flared when specialists refused to cross-reference, creating intellectual silences born of pride. The projector clicks, notebooks turn, the air vibrates with restrained breath. The 2019 discovery of a Hun child's grave near Marko introduced delicate glass beads shimmering under morning mist. The soil carried a sweet vegetal smell, and textile remnants clung like soft cobwebs. Analysis showed Mediterranean glass traded northward, proving economic reach. Reflectively, the child's burial speaks of care and the value placed on continuity. Yet conservation protocols postponed public display, reverence choosing quiet preservation. How does tenderness rewrite the legend of ravagers? Dew gathers, skylarks call, the mound rests warm. In 2020, pandemic restrictions forced researchers to analyze artifacts remotely, the glow of monitors replacing the smell of soil. High-resolution scans of the 188-centimetre ellipse allowed virtual reconstructions of wheel geometry, confirming engineering skill. Reflectively, distance deepened contemplation, aligning legend with digital precision. Still, closed borders paused active digs, accidental silence blanketing the plains. Keyboards clacked, video calls crackled, the night outside felt unusually still. By 2021, VR recreations allowed museum visitors to glide through a simulated Hun camp, hearing soft flute notes and smelling, through aroma diffusers, hints of smoked meat. The virtual chariot axle gleamed, measured precisely, bridging myth with data. Reflectively, immersion fosters empathy. Yet technology glitches muted some experiences, an accidental quiet. The headset hums, invisible wind brushes virtual braids, history breathes in coded whispers. In 2022, a collaborative publication translated Priscus anew, capturing his cadence in lyrical Hungarian while preserving Greek precision. The studio where translators worked smelled of fresh paper and green tea. They debated whether his description of Attila's eyes implied weariness or vigilance. Reflectively, language becomes a chariot wheel rolling through time. Still, some footnotes referencing modern politics were excised by cautious editors, suppression through editorial prudence. Pens drift, pages flip, voices soften into dusk. The 2023 drought exposed riverbanks revealing wooden stakes aligned with the chariot measurement, their surfaces rough, smelling of sun-baked algae. Dendrochronology dated them to Attila's decade, suggesting mooring posts. Reflectively, waterlines traced logistical expertise. Local authorities, fearing looting, covered the site with tarps, silence enforced to protect. The air tastes of dust. Dragonflies hover, tarps snap gently. The hush is protective, like a hand shielding candle flame. Now, in the present whisper, we revisit Seged's field, lanterns casting warm circles on the 118-centimetre imprint. The soil feels cool against fingertips, the night carrying the scent of rain and distant acacia. Every measurement, every ledger, every song threads into a tapestry, where Attila stands not as an unknowable scourge, but as a leader whose power flowed through logistics, rituals, and the delicate management of awe. The legend persists, yet within its glow we sense the grit of wood grain and hear the creak of wheels. Still we wonder whether the missing tomb is an accident of river currents, an intentional secret born of reverence, or simply a story that finds strength in remaining unresolved. The earth draws a quiet breath, stars listen, and the mystery stays open, inviting us to lean closer without shattering the hush. Scholars in the quiet reading room of the Biblioteca Apostolica Vaticana breathe in the dry comfort of vellum as they unfold Hydatius's chronicle, the inked lines dark as evening water. His terse notice of Attila's death, stained faintly by a dropped beeswax candle centuries ago, mentions the mourning of peoples he never met. A faint scratch where a medieval hand once underlined. Terror orbits his memory, catches the lamplight, guiding pale fingers across the page. Outside, Rome's night air smells of orange blossoms, but within, the parchment speaks of a thunderous court suddenly still, of warriors who wrapped their spears in blackened cloth and rode through dew-damp grass while women sang low laments. The hush of the scriptorium folds over these words, inviting the reader to imagine the stillness that followed the warlord's last breath, a silence filled not with swords, but with the slow rustle of mourning robes. Archaeologists tracing the Tissa's floodplain scrape patient layers of silt away from a ring of post holes, the soil smelling of riverweed and carried pollen, unexpected spring sweetness among the damp. Their laser-scanned grid reveals a circular mortuary enclosure consistent with Hunnic elite funerary rites, though no central grave remains. Goose down, preserved in pockets where moisture once pooled, shivers when warmed by a palm, suggesting feather-lined biers burned in place. Nearby, a scatter of bronze rivets and a flattened iron hoop, warped by heat into an imperfect oval, 89 centimeters across, echoes lost ceremonial wagons. The excavators whisper the names recorded by Jordanes, Elak, Dengizik, Ernak brothers, left to partition an empire now measured in charcoal and ash. The river keeps its secrets, murmuring against the bank, while the new data adds a soft footnote to ancient grief. Centuries later, in a Constantinopolitan workshop heavy with frankincense and drying papyrus, scribes of Marcellinus comes record the aftershocks of the Hun Empire's breakup. Their styluses tick across wax tablets as the city outside basks in salt-laden breezes. They catalogue the Roman campaigns that harried Attila's sons, noting battle casualties in columns balanced like deliberate breaths. A scrap of linen, used as a blotter, carries the scent of cedar oil from an icon burner in the corner, mingling with fresh ink. The account speaks of treaties renegotiated, of diplomats with rosemary sprigs tucked into belts to ward off sickness at meetings where gold payments resumed in smaller, precise weights. Each entry reads like the measured beat of a heart returning to calm after panic, yet the script retains a tremor that reveals Rome knew the reprieve might be temporary. At a museum in Sexfehevar, conservators cradle a silver-handled knife recovered from a 5th century grave, its blade etched with geometric motifs that gleam under fiber-optic lights. The metal smells faintly of the wax applied during conservation. But beneath it lies the tang of earth that cradled the weapon for 15 centuries. Micrographs show wear patterns matching bread slicing more than war, hinting that Hun households sustained themselves with daily rhythms alongside campaigns. A scrap of woven reed mat glued to the handle's residue evokes quiet meals, perhaps attendants serving Attila simple fare, while diplomats fretted over tribute. The case label recounts Sidonius Apollinaris's letters describing the hunched riders and their hard-baked bread, tying literary observation to the artifact's texture. Visitors lean close, the glass cool against their foreheads, as they picture the warlord breaking a loaf in a tent lit by tallow lamps, the scent of smoke clinging to his coat. Further east, in a research lab in Kazan, scientists analyze strontium isotopes in horse teeth excavated from the Volga steppe. The lab air smells sharply of ethanol and cold metal shelves, and a gentle hum from the mass spectrometer fills the room like distant bees. The samples reveal migrations north to the forest edge during harsh drought years around 440 CE, aligning with Chinese chronicles of climatic hardship. Granular data shows deliberate herd management. Mares and foals grazed on calcium-rich meadows, while sturdy stallions roamed on saltbush flats. These choices speak of strategists attentive to pasture cycles, binding Attila's campaigns to the smell of crushed sage and the whistle of winter grass in stressed seasons. The scientists note it in calm prose, but the cores glow with color-coded maps that trace hoofbeats across continents. A linen-bound codex in Munich holds the Gesta Hungarorum, its illuminations brushed with pigments that still smell faintly of egg tempera when warmed by gallery lights. The chronicler claims that the Magyars descended from Hun ancestors, weaving Attila into medieval Hungarian identity. In miniature, the warlord sits beneath a canopy of cobalt and vermilion, a falcon perched on his wrist and a silver goblet at his side. The parchment squeaks softly when turned, releasing a breath of ancient animal hide. While the story bends history into myth, marginal notes from a 15th century reader question the lineage, the ink faded but still legible under raking light. The manuscript whispers of a nation craving pedigree, of scribes in midnight scriptoria listening to rain on lead roofs as they penned genealogies that smelled of lamp oil and old wool. In an Icelandic turf house museum, visitors read the 13th century Atlamale, while the air smells of smoked lamb and peat. The poem recasts Attila as Atli, a brooding host who lures heroes into a twilight feast. Oral tradition swaddles the saga in echoing grief. The translation notes creak under the weight of consonants thick as sea mist. Scholars compare the verse to Hungarian chronicles, seeing how northern bards trimmed Hun brutality into familial treachery, setting the tale among flickering whale oil lamps. Outside, Atlantic winds hiss against sod walls, underscoring how far the legend sailed. The gentle narrative voice invites listeners to rest their heads on woolen pillows and trace the path of a name that drifted from the Danube to cold fjords. At the Vienna Court Library, the Chronican Pictum's gilded folios depict Attila meeting the Romans, their robes painted in layers that catch gallery light. The pigments exude a faint scent of varnished oak from the display frame. A tiny detail, a musician plucking a rebec behind the warlord, suggests a soundtrack lost to written accounts, perhaps a melody in a minor mode that lulled emissaries into conversation. The caption recounts how the chronicle, composed in 1358, balanced pride with caution, reminding viewers of betrayal and resilience. Students sketch the scene in graphite, their erasers leaving a soft smokiness in the air. The art murmurs of how memory paints the past with earnest colour, while archival balances hum quietly beneath. 17th century Jesuit reports stored in Krakow carry the smell of leather satchels and dried lavender tucked between pages to deter insects. One missionary describes visiting Sekali villages where winter fires crackled softly beneath cauldrons of cabbage soup. Elders spoke of Attila's Road, an earthen ridge leading to pasture, and the missionary's quill pauses mid-sentence to note the way children ran their fingers along weathered stones. He recognizes the mixture of fear and affection in their voices, documenting it with the patience of a listener who knows the evening bell will soon call him to compline. The manuscript records a hymn whispered before sleep, asking the scourge to watch over flocks rather than punish towns. The prayer blurs lines between dread and guardianship, the parchment warm from decades of handling. During the reign of Louis XIV, French genealogists in Parisian salons perfumed with rosewater argued that certain noble families descended from Attila through Merovingian queens. The parchment family trees ripple with powdered wig dust, and each inkstroke forms curls like violin bows. As they sipped chocolate thick as velvet, they debated the plausibility, referencing Sidonius, Gregory of Tours, and Lombard tales. The genealogists' voices softened toward midnight, matching the hush of lute strings, and they agreed to frame Attila as a distant ancestor who could lend glory, still safely remote. Their manuscripts, now browned and brittle, smell faintly of sweet-baked almond paste from long-faded patisserie treats, revealing that heroic ancestry was once consumed with dessert. Spanish dramatist Francisco de Rojas Zorrilla staged Attila, Rey de los Hunos, in 1667 before a Madrid audience smelling of orange peel and waxed boots. Stage directions in surviving scripts describe torches, smoking, drums muffled by leather to create a heartbeat on stage. The actor portraying Attila wore fox fur that shed under the heat, surrounding the stage with a wild scent that mingled with incense. The drama softened the conqueror into a conflicted soul, torn between love and duty. A prop inventory lists brass goblets, timber benches, and felt tents hung with embroidered eagles, evoking a dreamlike step under palace chandeliers. The script whispers to today's reader through the brittle paper, the words still warm with the applause that wrapped the first performance. In 18th century London, antiquarian John Horsley examined Roman inscriptions weathered by Northumbrian rain. tracing grooves with fingers that smelled of peat smoke from his hearth. He noted references to barbarian incursions, believed to recall Dacia's collapse under Attila, though centuries separated fact from inference. His sketches, made on rag paper speckled with flecks of linen, capture the texture of sandstone slabs. Horsley's footnotes compare the inscriptions to Priscus's testimony, weaving a tapestry where the chill of Hadrian's wall tangles with sun-baked Pannonian plains. The final page carries a faint bruise where a press flower once lay, perhaps a reminder that even the wake of conquest leaves space for quiet reflection. 19th century composer Franz Liszt. The air around his Weimar studio, thick with candle wax and coffee, drafted an unfinished symphonic poem titled Attila's Dream. Sketches show strings murmuring in minor thirds, while French horns hold long, velvety notes like wind over grass. Liszt scribbled in pencil, a graphite sheen smudging under the pink pads of his fingers. He jotted references to Priscus's descriptions of wooden cups and to the rumble of hoofbeats, intending to translate them into orchestral textures. The piece remained a fragment, yet listening to the recorded reconstruction today, echoes of hammered dulcimer and muted trumpets shimmer like moonlight on the Tisa. The music, gently surging, feels like a lullaby built from distant thunder. In Budapest's Hungarian National Archives, archivists open the Gesta Honorum et Hungarorum, Simon of Caesar's 13th century chronicle, releasing a scent of dust, ink, and the faint ghost of wormwood inserted as repellent. Simon writes that Attila's tent flaps were stitched with motifs borrowed from Parthian banners, linking east and west in threads and knots. Marginal doodles show knights with braided hair. A later hand added playful ink dots like a starry sky around the king's head. Scholars trace the genealogies that connect medieval Hungarian clans to Attila's imagined sons, understanding that the story served to knit communities during uncertain reigns. The hush of the archive is thick, broken only by the soft slide of cotton-gloved fingers turning pages. Ethnographers in the 1890s recorded Sekli lullabies that mention Attila's horses drinking from moonlit wells. Wax cylinder phonographs captured voices humming in kitchens fragrant with plum jam and wood smoke. One recording preserves the rustle of skirts and creak of a cradle, the melody winding around the words Ne aluje, hunyogo, silaj, urging a sleepy child to dream of the scourge guarding the door against wolves. Transcriptions in pencil faintly smear after decades, but the rhythm remains. Listening through modern headphones, the hiss of the cylinder becomes a gentle rain behind a song that reimagines a conqueror as a sentinel, a whispered promise to little ears. Early 20th century anthropologist Aurel Stein hiked along the Silk Road, his satchel smelling of camphor to repel insects, tracing references to the Xiongnu in Chinese annals. He paused at Dunhuang's Mogao caves, where paintings of armored riders with narrow eyes and high cheekbones gallop through swirling clouds of mineral pigment. The scholar's diary notes the cool touch of clay walls and the faint scent of bat guano mixed with incense. He speculated that the Xiongnu's legacy filtered westward, contributing to Hunnic military traditions. His pencil sketches show composite bows like those excavated in the Carpathian Basin, bridging desert night winds with Hungarian dawn mists. The desert's hush wraps the notes, aligning east-west with gentle insistence. During the First World War, Hungarian nurses stationed near the Carpathians wrote letters home mentioning soldiers who whispered Attila's name when artillery shells fell, believing the ancient rider would shield them. The hospital tents smelled of iodine, wet wool, and snow tracked in on boots. One nurse, Ilona, described holding a feverish hand while reciting lines from Janos Arani's poem, Rige, a Sadazazava's role, where Attila appears as ancestral father. She pressed lavender sprigs into the page, the scent preserved between folds of paper. Her words reveal how myth became a blanket, tucked around the wounded to keep nightmares at bay. Bombardments paused, and in the stillness, the past breathed alongside the present. In Prague's interwar cafes, surrealist painters daubed canvases that blurred Attila's profile with locomotives and smokestacks. The air smelled of coffee grinds and turpentine. One canvas, now in a private collection, shows the warlord's silhouette dissolving into riveted steel, suggesting modern industry as a new horde. Thin washes of grey drip like rain on coal piles, as shards of red recall torchlight. Critics gathered to watch the artist tilt the canvas, letting pigment flow under gravity, a modern echo of diverted rivers revealing restless histories. The gentle conversation pulled around metaphors, Attila as industrial revolution, as social upheaval. The painting rests in quiet now, varnish mellowing. Still the comparison hums softly like machinery in evening fog. In Soviet-era Hungary, schoolchildren listened to radio dramas dramatizing the Battle of the Utis River, the static-filled broadcasts smelling of hot valves and dust-heated Bakelite. Actors spoke with careful enunciation, their voices softened by reverb to evoke wide plains. Foley artists shook leather straps, clacked wooden blocks to mimic hoofbeats, and let a kettle whistle softly to suggest wind rising across grass. The script emphasized collective strength, portraying Attila's council as a proto-socialist assembly debating harvest distribution. Between scenes, narrators described archaeologists cataloguing grain silos and iron weigh scales, grounding ideology in artifact. The broadcast faded with a lullaby motif on flute and cymbalom, merging propaganda with bedtime storytelling. Meanwhile, in a Bucharest editorial office smelling of newsprint and lead type, magazines in the 1960s featured essays about the Huns' role in Romanian history. Scholars debated whether Attila's incursions had seeded the legend of Istrian warriors, linking to local folklore of luminous horsemen galloping along the Danube. Illustrations by graphic artists layered translucent washes of indigo and silver to depict river mists, light catching droplets as if on stage. The articles, printed on coarse paper, left fingertips smudged. Their tone sought balance, acknowledging violence while admiring logistic acumen, presenting Attila as both invader and reluctant catalyst for local resilience. In Mongolia's National Museum, a 1978 exhibition juxtaposed Hunnic artifacts excavated near Ulaanbaatar with photographs of Carpathian finds. The gallery smelled of sandalwood and the faint tang of bronze. Curators traced parallels between Chinese Han Dynasty accounts of Xiongnu agriculture and Priscus's notes on the Huns' gardens along the Danube. A map marked with red silk threads linked Orkhon Valley to Pannonia, the threads taut and smooth under visitors' fingers. The display offered delicate horsehair brushes for guests to imitate calligraphic scripts, encouraging them to feel the sweeping strokes that once recorded steppe diplomacy. The hall's quiet thickened with contemplation, guests moving in stockinged feet across polished floors. When the Berlin Wall fell, archaeologist Erika Heller returned to a site near the Elbe, where she had once excavated under East German supervision. The meadow smelled of damp pine needles and thawing soil. She discovered storage crates of artifacts left catalogued but unpublished, iron stirrups, bone gaming pieces, and a tin amulet box with traces of beeswax. The box, when warmed in her hands, released a faint honey scent, making her imagine a rider carrying a charm carved with protective runes in a language now lost. Heller's field notebook, bound in cracked brown leather, captured the sun's warmth on her shoulders as she remeasured pits carved into sandy loam. The data, combined with reopened archives, allowed a new narrative where Attila's followers lingered on German plains, bartering, mending harnesses, telling tales beside cooking fires. Contemporary linguists in Debrecen compare Hun loanwords preserved in Hungarian, Chuvash, and Yakut languages. Their conference room smells of printer toner, strong tea, and freshly sharpened pencils. Slides project phonetic diagrams, each curve representing a syllable shaped over centuries. They trace words for felt, for horse milk, for iron rivet, hearing echoes of Priscus's Greek transliterations. A visiting scholar demonstrates how the word satra, meaning tent, morphs across dialects, her voice lilting. The assembled audience listens, notebooks open, forming constellations of cognates. Outside, rain taps windows, a steady rhythm urging patience. Language becomes a soft harness binding cultures, coaxing understanding through whispered etymology. In a laboratory at the University of Cambridge, proteomic analysis of Hun cauldrons extracts residue of mare's milk, millet, and wild garlic. The lab smells of distilled water and plastic pipette tips. Scientists grind samples into powder finer than flour, then watch as chromatograms bloom like meadow grasses, each peak a flavor note. The results show communal feasts, mixing steppe staples with Roman imports like wine, an aromatic mingling of sour, sweet, and tannic. A researcher closes her eyes and imagines steam rising from a night cookfire, smoke threading through the camp while Attila's council holds quiet debate. The data prints on glossy paper, the ink still damp when fingers touch it, confirming that even the scourge shared meals fragrant with hospitality. Modern reenactors in Slovakia set up Hun camps for summer festivals, their tents smelling of tanned leather, pine smoke, and freshly oiled bows. They grind millet between stone querns, the rhythm soft as lullaby drums, and simmer soup thick with nettles. Under moonlight, they perform rituals reconstructed from archaeological hints. Small bronze mirrors reflect flames while women sprinkle kumis onto the ground, inviting ancestral spirits. Visitors slip their hands along horsehair reins, surprised by the silky coarseness. A storyteller unfolds Priscus's visit with gentle cadence, letting the audience rest on felt rugs while a cradleboard sways from the main tent pole. The reenactment becomes a breathing classroom, bridging centuries with the scent of sage bundled in offering. Meanwhile, digital archivists in Toronto create a layered map linking Attila's campaigns to Roman postal routes, overlaying data with soft gradients of ochre and teal. The lab is cool, smelling of ozone from servers and the subtle sweetness of recycled paper. Each click reveals a new corridor, timber roads smelling of resin, river barges creaking under loads of tribute grain, mountain passes echoing with yak bells. The map pulses gently, animation showing supply trains moving like slow constellations. Users can toggle sensory descriptors, causing pop-up notes to mention the tartness of fermented mare's milk or the grit of wind-borne dust at Aquileia's walls. The digital interface glows in the dark, inviting late-night explorers to glide through history like a quiet river. In 2015, cardiologist Laszlo Mackay donated his grandfather's journal to the Debrecen City Archives. The leather cover smells of pipe smoke and tallow. Inside, the elder Mackay recounts wandering the plains in 1910, sleeping beside barrows locals swore held Hun kings. He describes the taste of spring water drawn from wells lined with timber blackened by age, and the sight of dragonflies hovering over boggy flats. He records old men recalling a family tale, Attila commanding each clan to carve symbols into wood, hung on posts to mark grazing rights. The journal's pages crackle softly, delivering a blend of folklore and field observation that feels like a lullaby hummed by time itself. Japanese historian Nakamura Yuki sits in Kyoto's National Diet Library, the tatami mat smelling faintly of straw as she compares the Kojiki's tales of conquerors to Hunnic stories. She notices subtle coincidences, a king who laughs softly in council, a prince who rides a piebald horse into sunrise. Her research notes, written with a fountain pen that glides across cream paper, capture the whisper of silk sleeves in Nara, period palaces, and the rustle of felt in Hun camps. She suggests that shared values of mobility and ritualized hospitality link these distant narratives. As she bows over her work, the low murmur of the library blends with temple bells far away, reminding us that history's lullabies cross oceans. In a Paris perfumery lab, olfactory historian Carole Vasseur attempts to reconstruct the scent of Attila's court. The air is rich with resin, honey, and crushed herbs. She blends birch tar for the smell of saddles, oaked wine for Roman tribute, juniper smoke to evoke cleansing rituals, and a hint of animal musk from ethically sourced sources. The resulting accord is smoky yet warm, surprising testers with a sweetness that lingers like burnt sugar. Each bottle bears a label reading Pannonian Twilight, the liquid amber gleaming under soft lights. Customers inhale and imagine a night sky wide as eternity, a fire's glow on bronze fittings, the gentle murmur of strategists planning beneath starlight. Students in the city of Szeged spend a twilight field trip along the banks of the Tisza, where reeds rustle and the river smells of algae and silt. Their guide, a historian wrapped in a wool scarf, reads aloud from a new translation of Priscus while they sit on blankets. She encourages them to close their eyes and feel the damp air, to imagine the prickle of felt cuffs against skin, the weight of beadwork on a chieftain's cloak. They pass around a replica of a Hun belt buckle, the metal cool and heavy. Fireflies drift like falling sparks, and the students whisper questions about myth, evidence, and how to hold both gently. The river answers with steady breathing. DNA laboratories in Stockholm sequence the remains of a 5th century Hun woman found near the Kurus River, the room chilled and smelling of ethanol, nitrile gloves, and static-free plastic. They extract ancient DNA from petrous bone, the powder resembling chalk. Results reveal markers for lactose tolerance, surprising given the assumption of fermented dairy reliance, and traces of malaria resistance, suggesting exposure to marshlands. The team prints the data, the charts sharp on glossy pages where red and blue peaks form quiet mountains. They imagine her riding through morning fog, the taste of metal on her tongue from a bronze cup, the hum of bees around wildflowers. The data becomes a whispered biography, each base pair a syllable in a gentle chant. Italian restoration experts in Ferrara carefully clean a 15th century fresco of Attila meeting Pope Leo, the scaffolding smelling of fresh pine and lime plaster. Strokes of ultramarine re-emerge from beneath soot, revealing details often overlooked. The Pope's attendants hold sprigs of laurel. The warlord's horse wears a harness studded with hematite discs that catch light like stars. The restorers work with soft goat hair brushes, their hands steady, their breath slow. Removing grime becomes an act of unveiling dialogue, showing that the confrontation was painted as delicate negotiation rather than raw intimidation. Viewers later stand in the cooled chapel, the fresco shimmer bathed in diffused sunlight, and the story breathes again. American poet Camille Reyes writes a book-length poem titled Pannonian Lullaby, composing in a Brooklyn studio that smells of basil, rain-damp concrete, and printer ink. Her verses thread Attila through postpartum insomnia, city sirens, and the soft cooing of pigeons. She imagines the warlord's mother humming under a felt awning, the melody turning to wind that now whispers between apartment buildings. Draft pages, pinned to a corkboard, flutter when the window opens. In lines of free verse, she renders the chariot axle as an anchor in restless nights, and Attila's councils as support groups discussing resource, sharing under starlit yurts. The poem's gentle cadence invites modern readers to hold the scourge as a figure of restless care, not only rupture. Slovene spelunkers exploring karst caverns near Postojna discover charcoal drawings on limestone walls, stick figures on horseback, rows of dots, and a circle bisected by a line. Carbon dating hints at late antique origins, though scholars are cautious. The cave smells of damp stone, cool and mineral-laced. A faint breeze carries the scent of wet leaves. Archaeologists suggest the markings could be signals used by Hun scouts or local communities recording tribute deliveries. They document the drawings with low-light photography, the shutter clicking softly. The cave's echo transforms whispers into slow thunder, making each observation feel sacred. The marks remain ambiguous, a quiet voice from underground offering yet another layer. High in the Carpathians, botanists study meadow composition, the air sharp with pine sap and whistling wind. They identify plant species favoured by heavy grazing in the 5th century: feather grass, wild rye and fragrant clover. Soil samples smell of clay and crushed roots. The botanists collaborate with historians to model how Attila's herders rotated flocks, mapping month-by-month migration paths. Their report includes a sensory appendix describing breezes strong enough to rattle bronze bells, the taste of mineral-rich springs, the pale glow of dawn over endless grass. Pastures become amphitheatres where logistics compose symphonies of survival. In 2024, a team at the University of Szeged hosts a midnight symposium in the open field where the chariot imprint rests. Portable heaters infuse the tent with a metallic warmth, and tables display 3D prints of artifacts, their surfaces smelling faintly of resin. Scholars read papers accompanied by soundscapes, recorded hoofbeats softened by reverb, the cheer of cicadas, the low mutter of distant thunder. One presentation reveals new radiocarbon dates for burn layers at nearby campsites, aligning precisely with the years Priscus visited. Another introduces multispectral imaging of Roman ledgers, showing faint notations of Attila's man arrived. Attendees sip chamomile tea, their breath steaming in moonlight, as they consider how each discipline adds a petal to a blooming portrait. Hungarian handweavers in Kecskemét reconstruct Hunnic textiles using warp-weighted looms. Their workshop smells of lanolin, flax and dyed wool. Threads dyed with madder, walnut hulls and weld hang like soft rainbows. As they weave, they tap their feet in time with spindle whirs, creating a rhythm reminiscent of horses trotting. Finished fabrics, thick yet supple, display diamond patterns echoing those on excavated belt plaques. They drape a cloak over a mannequin, the cloth falling heavy and warm. Visitors run hands along the weave, feeling the texture that once brushed Attila's shoulders. The weavers speak softly about continuity, their voices blending with the loom's creak into a soothing hum. Meanwhile, theologians in Rome revisit the idea of Attila as flagellum Dei, scourge of God, discussing how the label shaped Christian thought. The seminar room in the Pontifical Gregorian University smells of old books and polished marble. A slide shows a marginal note in a Carolingian homily, where a scribe added golden pigment to the phrase, elevating it to a divine metaphor. Another presenter reads a letter from a bishop who interpreted Attila's arrival as divine warning to reform, the parchment still smelling of the lavender sachet stored with it. The conversation flows gently, acknowledging fear while embracing nuance. Voices rise and fall like Gregorian chant, concluding with a shared silence that honors both suffering and resilience. In a community center in Marco, elders host storytelling nights for children. The hall smells of paprika stew, freshly baked bread, and wax crayons. Grandparents sit on cushions, telling tales of Attila's horses singing beneath the moon, of young pages counting tribute coins while chewing licorice root to stay awake. A volunteer strums a kobza, its nylon strings replaced by gut to capture old timbres. Children draw what they hear: shimmering tents, copper bells, wheat bending under wind. The drawings adorn the walls, each crayon line a new lens on memory. Parents watch, arms around each other, as the story settles like a soft blanket over the evening. Archaeometallurgists in Krakow melt down tiny surplus fragments from Hun arrowheads to analyze alloy composition. The foundry smells of hot iron, graphite crucibles, and charred wood. Sparks float like fireflies as the metal liquefies, glowing orange. The results show deliberate mixtures. Iron tempered with traces of nickel and manganese, indicating knowledge of ore sources from beyond the Carpathians. The scientists note how such metallurgy required seasoned craftspeople, their hands calloused, their ears tuned to the hissing of quenching baths. The report, printed on rag paper, rustles as pages turn, stating in gentle academic language that the Hun war machine depended as much on artisanal intimacy as on ferocity. Australian historian Marika Sipos curates an online archive of Attila-themed postage stamps. The collection features designs from Mongolia, Hungary, Romania, and even Cuba, each smelling faintly of gum arabic when moistened. High-resolution scans show variations. Attila clad in scarlet, in emerald, on horseback, standing before a map. Sipos writes commentary describing the tactile pleasure of lifting a stamp with tweezers, the soft whisper as it leaves an album page. She connects each issue to political contexts: the 1956 Hungarian uprising, the 1969 Mongolian cultural renaissance. Her posts feel like letters from a friend, encouraging readers to linger over color gradients and the gentle sheen of printed legend. At the Smithsonian, a temporary exhibit pairs Attila's story with Native American perspectives on horse cultures. A Lakota elder describes how the first horses smelled of sage and sweat as they thundered over new grass. Beside displays of Hun artifacts, there are parfleche bags painted in earthy hues. Visitors breathe in cedar from the gallery's smudge bowl, linking steppe traditions with plains rituals. Interpretive panels note convergences, mobile societies, respect for animal partners, negotiations mediated under open skies. The exhibit's quiet tone invites contemplation, aligning global narratives with considerate reverence. In the Hungarian town of Oprestaza, nightfall reveals laser projections across a reconstructed earthwork circle. The air smells of dew-wet grass and nearby campfires. The show overlays Priscus's words, medieval chronicles, and modern findings in shimmering light, while speakers emit low drones reminiscent of wind. As the narration speaks of the missing tomb, the circle glows amber, then fades to blue, leaving stars overhead as the final illumination. Attendees hold blankets around their shoulders, their faces silvered by moonlight. The projection concludes with a hush, encouraging everyone to listen to the night crickets, distant dogs, a soft breeze moving through poplars, suggesting that the story continues in sound. Serbian potters in Novi Sad craft replicas of Hun cauldrons, their studio smelling of wet clay and kiln heat. They mold vessels with flared lips, pressing comb patterns into the surface. When the kiln door opens, steam drifts out scented of clay and ash. The pots, once cooled, are seasoned by simmering water infused with thyme and bay leaf, imitating ancient practices to seal pores. The artisans record the process in notebooks with sketches and measurements, noting how the handles warm the hand when lifted by cloth. They pour herbal tea into the cauldrons, letting visitors sip and imagine communal meals under starry skies. Hungarian astronomer Mies Fodor observes the Perseid meteor shower from the Hortobagi, the plain smelling of sagebrush and warm dust. She notes in her journal how medieval chroniclers compared Attila's armies to falling stars, bright and terrifying yet brief. Through her telescope, meteors streak silver-green, silent flares in the dark. She whispers to her students about the comets recorded in Chinese annals during Attila's campaigns, considering whether celestial omens influence decisions. The group lies on blankets, feeling the cool earth and hearing night insects. Meteors fade, leaving faint trails like the memory of hoofbeats across the sky. In Rome's Palazzo Venezia, a quiet corner houses a bronze statue of Attila commissioned by Mussolini but veiled after the war. Conservators unveil it for study, the bronze smelling of wax polish. The warlord stands stern, his cloak sweeping like a wave. Historians discuss how regimes manipulate symbols, the conversation held in hushed tones to respect echoing halls. A historian runs a finger near the cloak's edge, not touching, just feeling the chill radiating from metal. The statue returns to storage, wrapped carefully, but notes remain that describe the weight, the colour, the balance of the figure, reminders of how history is staged, hidden, and reconsidered. Archaeologists in Romania excavate a 5th century smithy near San Nicolau Mare, the pit smelling of charred oak and damp soil. They uncover anvils with hammer marks, slag heaps, and a forge bed lined with clay tiles, each bearing impressions from sandals. A charred chestnut shell rests in slag, its sweetness long evaporated but noted in the inventory. Metallographic analysis reveals quenching in oil rather than water, a technique requiring earthenware jugs of animal fat, evidence of planning beyond brute force. The field team eats lunch on folding stools, chewing bread scented with fennel while flipping through Priscus's account of Attila's modest eating habits. The sight hums with the memory of labour, of sparks flying under a low ceiling. Modern Hungarian novelist said Sofia Tarnai publishes a series of letters imagined between Attila and the Roman general Aetius. The book, bound in linen smelling of fresh ink, invites readers to taste honeyed wine and roasted onions in each imagined feast they discuss. Tarnai's prose flows like night river water. She interweaves archaeological findings, lead seals, grain contracts, horse tethering posts with conversations about mortality and governance. Reviews praise the novel's hush, the way it encourages readers to linger over each sentence as if listening to a friend by candlelight. The narrative stretches the question of enemy and ally into a delicate web of mutual regard. In the 2030s, researchers at the European Space Agency analysed satellite radar data to detect ancient earthworks under farmland. The mission control room smells of coffee and ozone. Hyperspectral imaging reveals circular patterns beneath wheat fields, matching the diameters of known Hun camps. Data renders in soft greens and purples, the visualizations almost meditative. Analysts imagine the camps bustling with artisans, fragrant with smoke and damp leather. They model how wagons arranged in concentric circles would appear from space, the geometry echoing lunar craters. Each discovery is logged with precise coordinates, yet the notes read like poetry, oval shadow under barley, whispering of remembered wheels. In the Pannonian Basin, a community science project engages local farmers in soil sampling. Buckets of earth smell of humus, iron, and sun. Participants document unusual layers, charcoal flecks, compacted clay, phosphate concentrations likely from animal pens. They share observations over plum palinka, toasting to ancestors unknown. A teenage participant notes how the soil under her family's vineyard feels cooler, perhaps because an ancient ditch runs there, collecting morning mist. The data feeds into open access maps, building a tactile portrait of Hun land use grounded in the scents and textures of everyday labour. A Turkish oud player records an album titled Steppe Reverie, blending Central Asian modes with Hungarian folk motifs. The studio smells of polished wood, coffee, and warm electronics. Tracks feature shimmering trills that evoke yurt door curtains swaying, percussion matched to the beat of trotting horses, and whispers in Hungarian recounting Attila's diplomacy. Listeners stream the album late at night, eyes closed, letting the music brush past like soft leather against cheek. Reviews speak of warmth, of being cradled by melody, as if the warlord himself gently guards the listener's sleep. In 2035, a joint French-Hungarian team publishes 4D reconstructions of Attila's capital near Tiszapuszpoki. Using LiDAR and historical inference, the model shows the city through seasons, scents coded into descriptive notes, spring's damp loam, summer's crushed chamomile, autumn's smoke from leaf fires, winter's sharp frost stinging the nose. VR users hear geese honking over reed beds, children giggling amid felt walls, council voices murmuring. The simulation allows viewers to kneel beside the river, scoop virtual water that sparkles while their haptic gloves vibrate gently. Educational programs encourage resting in the city's quiet corners, listening to wind chimes made of bone. In St. Petersburg's Institute of Oriental Manuscripts, scholars open a Tang dynasty scroll referencing envoys from the west. The silk smells faintly of camphor used for preservation. The brushstrokes, dark as raven feathers, describe emissaries with braided hair and fur-lined cloaks offering ivory and falcons. The text likely refers to Hunnic or post-Hunnic ambassadors negotiating along the Silk Road. Scholars read aloud, their voices echoing in a hall lined with lacquered cabinets. They imagined the envoy's journey, the crunch of frozen ground under hooves, the spice-laden air of Chang'an markets, the diplomatic exchanges under lantern light. Hungarian beekeeper Zoltán Bata dedicates a hive to Attila, infusing the honey with herbs used in steppe cuisine, sage, thyme, and meadowsweet. The apiary smells of wax and blooming linden. Bata sets up interpretive panels, explaining how beeswax sealed Hun bowstrings, how honey flavored travel rations. Visitors sample the amber nectar from wooden spoons, tasting notes of wildflower and faint smoke. A portion of proceeds funds archaeological digs. As bees buzz, their collective hum resembles distant war drums softened by distance, a sound that lulls the listeners into contemplation. A future space mission named Pannon's Star sails past the moon, its crew carrying a memory capsule with Attila artifacts, a 3D print of the chariot oval, scans of Jordanus's manuscripts, recorded lullabies. The spacecraft smells of metal, filtered air, and freeze-dried meals. Astronaut Anna Kovacs reads Priscus aloud to her sleeping crewmates as the ship enters lunar orbit, her voice floating weightless. She imagines Attila under the same silver light, gazing at the moon while fires crackle. The capsule, sealed with a beeswax stamp, will rest in a lunar library, a gentle whisper of Earth's layered past echoing in silent regolith. Back on the Hungarian plain, dawn breaks over Szeged's field once more. Dew beads on the protective tarp covering the chariot trace, each droplet smelling faintly of wet grass and distant river. Researchers pack away instruments, their gloves smelling of latex and peat. They leave a small offering, a sprig of rosemary and a few millet grains. Beside the imprint, a nod to hospitality and memory. The sun warms the soil, releasing a scent of minerals and thyme. Birds lift into sky, their wings whispering. The field settles, holding its oval secret, while the world around it continues to dream of Attila the Hun, the scourge of God whose near destruction of Europe now unfolds as a gentle story of logistics, diplomacy, and the deft balance of awe that keeps history breathing